Welcome to More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it, also known as conversations with the most important people you've never heard of. Today we are recording from Astoria, Queens, Lordsburg, New Mexico, and San Francisco, California. Our guest is Lindsey Simon. Lindsey, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Lindsey Simon. I am the VP of Engineering for a company called Vercel. Vercel is making the web platform fast and amazing for developers and for end users. And I've been in tech and in this industry for 20 plus years. Yeah, I guess we're going to get into it.
Yeah, you brought up Vercel, so let's give them a moment of discussion. How are you making the web platform, the web faster, better for developers?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll go back to how I came to know Vercel. I was working at a startup that was trying to revolutionize the car buying experience, right? Like it was cool. If you wanted to test drive a used car, we would drive the car to your house and you could buy it on an iPad. And it was going to subvert the, experience of going to a dealer and getting, bamboozled effectively. Um, a lot of wetware, a lot of software in that, and then also a lot of hardware, a lot of entropy, a lot of things that can go wrong with cars. So it was an interesting startup, and ultimately pretty exciting. But I went there to learn React. From a technological point of view, I went there to learn React. From a mission standpoint, I believed in it. I just like everybody else. The car dealership experience is equal opportunity to get bamboozled. So I went there. I was working with one of the people who'd worked on the React team at Facebook, and it was this awesome experience. I believed React was fundamentally going to change how web applications were built. I had left Google on that belief, in fact, because I didn't think what Google was doing was going to be enough, and I just saw enough, affinity with how I thought about what would make building web applications easier there in the bare bones of React at that time, and me and a ton of other people. So not a real prescient sense, but and at the end of that time, I'd been there 2-ish years. I was leaving to go back to work with some other people who I'd worked with. The company wasn't growing, and I saw this post about something called Next.js, and it was this little pot. I don't know how to describe it. It was a little marketing video that Guillermo Rauch put together, and it was a command line interface to deploying a web application. Like you bought a domain, you deployed a standalone basic React application, but the framework did something that I'd spent a while architecting at Shift, which was it did server-side rendering. If you have a dense website and you want good SEO, you have to deliver. You can't deliver a single page application and let the browser just build all the HTML and render it. Like that's right. Okay for users, sort of. It has performance implications to it, but it's really not good for bots, right? So you want to get crawled, you need straight up HTML. So when I saw that this was this framework that had built that in from the ground up, I was like, oh, this is really cool. So I was pretty enamored with Next.js, and 3+ years later, I had hobby projects that I worked on just for fun. I can tell you a little bit about one of them because it was relevant. I ended up having something where the build system didn't work, and at that time, actually, Vercel, the company, it was called Zeit. Zeit, the company, was kind of an abstraction on Docker, and I was interested. I thought Docker was cool, but of course I didn't want to spend all my time learning about it. So Vercel was great. I could use it, but I didn't have to learn that much about it. So I was deploying my thing, and the build wasn't working. So I wrote into customer success. I was like, hey, this thing doesn't work. For some reason I bought a pro membership. This is like people who bought Discord's Nitro membership. They just did it because they thought it was going to give them something better. I don't know why what I thought being a pro customer on Vercel was going to get me. But I thought, my whole life and career has been about making the web faster and better. And here's this company, I believed in the mission. I'll be a pro customer. It's not expensive. So I did that. And I wrote in and I was like, hey, my build's not working. I've tried. I don't have the time to figure it out. I have another job, maybe you can help me. And then I start getting emails because somebody's pushing branches to my repository on GitHub, and it's building and failing. And then there's another push, and I'm looking and somebody's committing code to my repository to figure out what's going on with the build system and changing the configuration file. And I could see in real time, this customer success engineer from Vercel debugging what was happening in my little repository. And I immediately wrote into jobs@zeit.co and said, whatever you're doing, this is the future, and I should work there. But here's my resume. I don't know why you'd want to hire me, anyway. And a month later, somebody had just joined on the go-to-market side who was finally reading the jobs@zeit.co inbox and was like, hey, come hang out. We're just up the street. Come, Mika Sharma, whatever. So I did, and I got a drink with him in the CRO, and I demoed my demo app to Guillermo, and then COVID happened, so I didn't actually join the company for a year. But that's how I came to Vercel, very much through the product itself and a deep admiration for what they were doing. Also, I was working at that time at Salesforce, and our marketing team was rebuilding the marketing site on Next.js. And they weren't using Vercel because Salesforce couldn't, procure this non-SOC 2, independent hosting platform. They didn't host anything outside of the Salesforce VPN. But, they were using Next to build and ship. And I was like, so maybe this is a Trojan horse in the enterprise. What kind of adoption does Next.js have? And then I started talking to other companies before I joined Vercel Zeit at the time. Like I got to do my due diligence, so I'm talking to companies, and some big blue chip companies. They're all betting on Next.js, like they're building web teams around Next.js. I'm like, this is a Trojan horse. Okay, well if they figure out a go-to-market strategy, maybe this company's got legs, and I just wanted to work there. There's a funny story that one of the board members tells. He asked me not long ago. He's like, this is Dan Levine at Excel. He's like, hey, maybe you came to Vercel for a chill IC job. And I was like, I don't think there's any such thing at Vercel, but maybe he's right. Like, I think I was trying to, I had 20 plus reports during COVID, and I was probably looking for, go build stuff and, get into a different vibe. And then, of course, I ended up doing what I do now, which is kind of similar to what I did then. But it was more natural, I'd say. Actually, it's pretty natural at Salesforce too, but meh.
So I'm going to back us up here in a
you asked me about web
but I want
to makes Next.js. I should have answered your question. I gave you an origin story. Next.js makes building a web application exceedingly easy with like the defaults for the framework produce a fast user experience. So the developer experience is everything I've been trying to build at the startups I've been at. And then the user experience is as if you've gotten all the build rules right and you've delivered, page level, bundling. And I was pretty excited by that. So that is the other answer to your question. So in a combination of like what we now call managed infrastructure and the DX platform of Vercel produce kind of an incomparable developer and end user experience all around.
So I find that interesting. What you're talking about is pretty commonplace among platforms now with server-side rendering and things like that. But what I'm more interested in is the client experience that you had before you worked there. This is something that a lot of companies could do, but don't. And because a company took this random pro employee or pro client, you gave them $130 or whatever it was for the year, it doesn't matter, and you had an issue, they didn't say send us a bug report, they didn't say write a patch, they didn't say any of that. They said this is, I assume on GitHub, on a GitHub repo, it's available for free. I want to scratch an itch and see if I can fix this guy's problem. Right? And they went out and just started helping. Now, you can't do that always, of course. There's logistics involved. But there's a lot of environments where that kind of attitude will create a proactive loyalty where you become an advocate for working with them. A lot of businesses won't put in that effort. So I just want to applaud Vercel for taking a moment and just saying, hey, maybe we can fix this guy's problem in 30 minutes and we've made his life infinitely easier. Well, and now you work with them.
Yeah.
as a side effect, right?
Yep.
That just sounds like good humaning to me
I mean,
on
that's
both
it.
sides.
Like the culture of the company that they, really, and this, you could see this in the nature and the growth of the company, right? Like 4+ years of nothing but product market fit, just attempts to really, really get it, to get a good product. Like they didn't start with go to market. In fact, when I joined, they had just sort of assembled a go to market initiative that found a very, very ripe market because they'd done that. And really, like you come down to it, it's like this was one person in the CSE organization who, I still am, ever impressed by. I don't know, it was the policy of the company that that's what they did is they'd go like land code. I doubt it. I seriously doubt it. But that's what Paulo did. That's how he operated, and that's who they hired. Like a lot of the early employees who are now, senior engineers at the company either started on CS or, customer success or, something just like come help the company, you know. And to wit, when I joined, Guillermo had me do product. Like, he looked over my resume, which includes no experience as a product manager, said, I'm going to have you do product management. It's like, oh, okay. I think maybe this is one of Guillermo's kind of his superpowers. Is like, hey, I'm going to get you in the door and give you something to do that needs doing. And it's on you to sink or swim and bring all of yourself to work. And that's pretty compelling. I was like, oh, that sounds great. And
It's
then,
a
I hung up the call and was like, oh my God, what have I gotten into?
Well, it's also a fantastic way, a lot of companies nowadays focus on a title without looking at, it's they're trying to fill a slot. They're treating people like line items
Mm-hmm.
instead of taking a consideration of who the human being is and based on their overall experience, what they can bring to the table. And that actually rolls me into when I said we were going to back up, talking about your career direction, your trajectory a little bit. Your time in tech kind of kicked off as webmaster of the Austin Chronicle. What's the Austin Chronicle and what kind of led you from journalism to tech?
Yeah, so I graduated with a pretty multidisciplinary degree from the University of Texas called Plan 2. And Plan 2 was basically like, you don't know what you're going to do, but, it kind of fostered growth mindset, I'd say. And it was amazing. It was an incredible experience. I am very grateful for my experience at UT, which is a very big school. And I was concerned, I was scared about that. But anyway, so actually, when I graduated, I was working as a cook. I worked as a cook to help pay for school, and I had this really gnarly bike wreck with a car. So I was a cook, and I was also interning at Texas Monthly. Texas Monthly is a pretty prestigious journalism magazine in Texas. I mean, I grown up with it as a um, kind of a paragon of both good literature and good culture, restaurant reviews, and also really interesting investigative journalism. And I was interning there as a fact checker, but that also meant I got to meet these incredible writers and type up their interviews, get involved with, go join them on escapades to do stuff. So I was doing that and working in the restaurant. And then I had this bike wreck with a car and I couldn't walk for about a year. So I needed to get a job that I didn't stand up 24 hours a day in the kitchen. And that was actually a tough experience. But, and I tried to get the job at Texas Monthly. I didn't have enough experience. So I applied at the other news organization that I was impressed by, which was the Austin Chronicle. And I got a job, not the job I would have wanted. I would have applied for something in editorial, right? Writing. But I got a job running my job was in advertising, and I was the lead for the advertising assistants, which basically meant that I drove around and picked up money from advertisers like strip clubs, hair salons, restaurants, and then brought it back to the newspaper. I was a courier, but I was
Did you
also
collect VIG?
no, no. But that
Okay.
was break into the that industry, and then I kind of figured out, I was like, hey, maybe what I'll do is I'll organize the routes for the couriers using a computer at the home office, and I'll send those other people out, and then I don't have to go driving around. Um, so then I asked for access to a computer, and it kind of snowballed to I ended up becoming the webmaster after learning things about the accounting system and how to like tune the accounting system, which is some old software. Um, and yeah, then I was building tools for the writers, and so I was always kind of an enabler. I was a mediocre writer, and I got to write some pieces thanks to the very generous editors at the newspaper about things I really cared about. And I guess they threw me a bone here and there. Like I got to interview Suzanne Vega. I got to interview Richard
Oh, yeah.
Garriott. Some just absolute, idols of mine. Richard Garriott, aka Lord British of Ultima and Origin Systems software, and I spent some time as the webmaster, and that was great because that was like the dawn of advertising on the web. I remember my controller at the newspaper saying, like, is anyone ever going to make money advertising on the web? I mean, we sold it, but it was like a, extra free line item with your purchase of, in paper purchases. And then, the next 5 years saw Craigslist eat the classified industry for all of these newspapers, and Google come out with a way to make advertising relevant. So, I was sitting there at the newspaper during this whole time and kind of watching it happen. And then finally I had the bug to get into startups, and I got into one very strange circumstances, but it worked out. I got into a startup, and that was how I left the newspaper eventually. I was there like 7 years. It was a lifestyle job. I could have and would have stayed there happily forever, but I did have some other ambition, I guess.
Well, I think the journalism industry is in a constant state of flux now because just by nature of it's no longer, the Austin Chronicle, for example, is now worldwide if it's still being published,
Yeah. Oh, totally.
and you have, yeah, you're no longer competing for just your eyeballs. You're competing for other eyeballs because your eyeballs are somewhere else because everything's available.
Yep.
Um, Tell me, is Austin Chronicle, are they associated with South by Southwest or?
Yes. So the people who started the Austin Chronicle also started South by Southwest. And for them, particularly Lewis Black and Nick Barbaro, I am, ever grateful. The other chap was Roland Swenson, who I never met particularly, I didn't know him particularly well. He kind of spun off and spent all of his time on South by Southwest. So we had the building for the newspaper right across this like little field was the building for South by Southwest. And so once a year we would all get together and like do this stuff to try to promote South by Southwest in the newspaper and do interviews, etc. And then interactive started. Actually, that's really what kind of kicked for me this sense that the world is bigger. I was writing software for South by Southwest Interactive for the booth floors and just things, utility stuff, but also eventually I ended up working on something called the panel picker for South by Southwest, which is how they decide to democratize what has always historically been the black box process of, hey, I want to come speak at your conference. They did something pretty unique and interesting. That's Hugh Forrest's, to his credit, but I got hired to build it. And it was awesome. But yeah, so South by Southwest was a big part of the, trajectory for the interactive industry, which ultimately overtook, in some ways music and film in terms of, well, there is no, the distinction is like, you can't be in music and film and succeeding without also building your business as an, interactive and, multimedia endeavor. So interactive though, at that time, Twitter launched at South by Southwest. There's some famous sort of milestones. I remember going and seeing the, presentations on micro formats, which were the very early move from people to build semantic web things. And in fact, and even South by Southwest was pretty crucial in terms of some decisions I made in my own career around technology. Like I had the first startup I worked at, I was building interfaces in Flash. Which was ActionScript as the programming language, which is very much like TypeScript today. It's this combination of Java and ECMAScript. And then, I went to a South by Southwest. It was a breakdown. It was a battle between Flash and HTML5 at the time, and it was like, who's better? And they'd made a ski resort map, a live interactive ski resort map. And the one in Flash was just dope. Right. It was really cool. It was kind of like had perspective and like you could hover the things and get all the intel. And it was really nice. And then the people who built the web version, it was about as good in terms of information gathering, but it was a little jankier. The lines weren't as smooth. You didn't have this kind of 60 frames per second animation for transitions and stuff, tweening. But then they're like, hey, let's view source. What's the accessibility story? And, they could view source and like this thing was navigable in a way for information gathering by a machine or by somebody who couldn't like see the images. And the Flash story was just zero. There was nothing. There's nothing there. It's like, oh, well, Macromedia is going to build an accessibility feature that whatever. Bullshit. And so I immediately turned tide and I was like, yeah, Flash is going to die. This is the way. And so then I started focusing on, web.
Well, not to mention all the security implications of Flash as well.
Yeah, I think but that wasn't what drove me as an application developer. I assumed, and more or less still do, that like, yeah, that's a specialty that you can spend the time and energy and kind of get there. But of course, you're right. I mean, running an untrusted binary on an untrusted runtime on your machine, like ultimately, I did not have that foresight. I didn't think, oh, Apple's going to kill it. I just thought it would become irrelevant because the things you could build in it were pretty amazing. I mean, people's portfolios, the interactive like design portfolios in that time coming out in Flash were just unreal cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a time of transition. When I got into this, it wasn't, we had image maps, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was, really old school stuff.
Yeah.
And so as we start seeing the progression, you always wonder, what is this going to do next? And what is this going to do next? And nowadays, most of your applications are web-based in some way, right?
Oh yeah.
It may be asynchronous to a server solution, but yeah, that's really what it is now. But, there's other things here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk to the younger generation for a second. I have a son who's 28, and I have a daughter who's 20 and 18. Two daughters, they're 20 and 18.
Cool.
Getting a job is different, I think, now. You mentioned to our producer that you got all your jobs because you just went and asked. I can relate to that. I mean, my first job, I was like 12, and I said, I'm going to mow lawns. So I just went to people's houses, knocked on the door and said, hey, can I mow your lawn for $8?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, great. I'd rather sit here and drink beer and watch the football game anyway.
Good story.
What's your experience with that? And do you think it's different now? I mean, do you think that, our 22, 25-year-olds can just go out and knock on a door and say, hey, look, I can do good if you give me a chance?
Well, I wouldn't say every job that's been the case, but I'll also say you just don't know if you don't try. Or the old Wayne Gretzky quote, like, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Right.
And, I think about, again, some of the jobs I had were just either pretty random. They weren't all like career moving, things. Like I taught in a school, and I taught in the school because I used to drive by the school every day to go to the Chronicle. And I was like, these kids just look cool. Like it was an alternative school for kids that were struggling in their other schools. And so this, guy who went to Yale made a Quaker oriented, like growth mindset little school. And it was just on the way there. I was like, I don't know, I want to just do something. Like I want to be involved in it. I felt a desire to just connect with that community for some reason. And like, for a while I just volunteered and tried to build their library network. And then sooner or later I was teaching computer science to high school kids. For a couple of years, 3 years, because like it worked. Yes, I already had another job, so I had the privilege of not being like broke ass, and that was my source of future. But I wasn't thinking like that. I wasn't that ambitious, and I never have been particularly career oriented. I've been mission oriented, and I've been, you mentioned in some of the notes, you're like, oh, let's talk about pragmatism. It's like, yeah, the idea of life and learning, that is what gives me energy. Give me things I don't know how to do, or, scare me a little bit. And they kind of attract me because I want to prove to myself that I will or won't fail in different circumstances. and learn my own limits or test them, etc. So yeah, I think, I tell people random stories just to remind them that, like, hey, if you'd be surprised who you can gain access to as a mentor in the world, or just to learn from. And by that I don't mean they opt into being your mentor, but like you certainly learn something from them simply by saying, hey, do you have a side project I can work on with you? That goes a rather long way. For context, I've worked on side projects with Guido van Rossum, the creator of Python, Steve Souders, who is my
Mm-hmm.
like the mentor in the web performance space for me. Just by randomly asking, and just finding a way. Like, yeah, they'll give you an opportunity. It's like, sure, here, try. This is what I want to do. Cool, go away, add value.
Well, you said, you were talking about, you know, you can miss 100% of shots that you don't take, right? So you got to take a shot. But also you talked about failure, and while I have been blessed in that I have a personality that allows me to accept failure as an opportunity versus something to beat myself with. I think that a lot of the younger generation hasn't quite figured that out yet. What is a failure in your life, or maybe even the failure in your life, that you have been able to turn into an opportunity?
Hmm. I can tell you failures to the extent that I turned them into an opportunity. What I'll say is that I can tell a story that makes it sound like an opportunity. It does not, but I can't tell you I didn't beat myself up over the decision, and, that it was the right decision. Um, you know, I mean, all you can ever do is look at the current life you have and say, well, literally, of all the branches of things, you couldn't have the one you have right now if you'd made any other decisions. I mean, so it's kind of a like, hey, I have a beautiful 9-year-old daughter. If I'd made any other decision in my life, would that still be true? It wouldn't be the same, right? They're infinite
Right.
of branches. So I could, therefore, you make a story that you need to get comfortable with. And you need to be able to be comfortable with beating yourself up a little bit, because you're going to make decisions that are, you know, in hindsight, you don't know what would have happened differently. And I can give you examples of two of those decisions that I think are like pretty interesting. One was, I was building a startup while I was in Austin before I went to work at Google, called Dishola. And my idea was, and this is before I knew Yelp existed, right? I was like, I've got this awesome idea. It'll combine my love for cooking in the industry with journalism and somehow find a way to pay journalists. And the idea was you would write a review, not of a restaurant, but of an amazing dish at the restaurant. So that if you're in Austin and you want the breakfast taco, and not just the best breakfast taco, but like the potato egg taco, like a genre subset, like I can tell you where to go get that. Not the best restaurant. Like I wouldn't vouch for everything there, but I would wax poetic about this one dish. And so is the dishola. And I didn't have a real good monetization story, but I did have somebody who was going to angel invest in it. And then I had the opportunity to go work at Google, and I didn't know, it was kind of a no-brainer to me. Like, yeah, do I stick it out on this idea that I don't know? I believed in it. I wanted it to exist, but is it a business? I don't know. And so I went to Google, and then consequently somebody built a competing website that was very, very similar, but as a startup, with an advisor at one of the great design agencies in San Francisco, and then they got bought by, I think, Open Table for a couple $1,000,000. So I was like, I mean, I did the same thing. I could have done that, and mine was this labor of love thing, and they did what they did much more quickly. And there's a lot of mistakes I made in that journey, in a sense. But one was I didn't just go all in. I went all in on something else, and I could have probably gone all in on it. Even at that time, I joined a team at Google called App Engine, and it was the early team building this platform, very like Vercel, by the way. App Engine, it was very much like Heroku and Vercel in this way. And they were like, oh, we'll rebuild Dishola on App Engine. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I was worried that like maybe it would be a good thing and then somehow Google might own it. It would be complicated. And I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And, and also I was, yeah. there was, so there was some missed opportunity there. And that was like the only good startup idea I think I ever had, just independently, where I believed in it. It was just my idea. And I'd put a lot of time and energy into that. The other was, and again, again, like journey wise, but I did get I did a great career at Google. I don't know what would have happened if I built Dishola on App Engine and been hopeful for the outcome of Dishola. Who knows? And maybe I had been working on, the local stuff for Google that's now very much a part of my life that I do get a lot of utility out of. Who knows? The other one was early on. I guess this is 12-ish years ago. I had this kind of weird experience where somebody wrote me and was like, "Hey, I heard about you. Like somebody's recommended you to talk to me. I'm building a company. We built this thing. It was like it was Project Honeypot. We know you were involved in it because I'd been involved in some security stuff back in the day in Austin at the first startup I was at. That's a whole other story. But anyway, and they're like, we're going to build this company, and I spent a bunch of time with this guy, and like, we saw eye to eye on many things, but I couldn't. There were reasons I couldn't like make the leap at that time, and there I also had some misgivings, and so I didn't join what became Cloudflare, which is now multi, over 10, 15,
Yep, we
$20
use
million
it.
dollar company. Yeah, huge company, and very much, in some ways, very spiritually aligned with what Vercel's after, like making the web better, making the web faster. And so that was, there were times where I kind of beat myself up on that decision for a couple of years. But, you can't know what would have happened. I don't think I would have been happy at that time working at that company in that environment, for reasons. But, I had other things. So who knows? But certainly, having been a founder of that company, I'd be very retired. So, there's things you have to live with. And I think that's a very standard Silicon Valley story. Like, I also interviewed Facebook in 2019 and thought, it was a crazy environment with kids building a social network that I didn't care about at the time. And, that obviously was a good idea. That kind of got big. So, you know, sorry, that would have been 2008, not 2019. That was 2008. So pretty good.
Yeah, it was like
I just did
2019.
Google.
Facebook's pretty much settled at that point.
No, no, yeah, no, this is 2008. It was like I was at Google for about a year and very drunk on the Kool-Aid as Google. And I was like, I'm not going to go work it, in the Palo Alto hospital building, this giant open office with people trying to, engagement hack kids, more or less is how I looked at it. It wasn't Zynga, but it was similar in some ways, and I wasn't into it. But I didn't see the big picture around it becoming a technology mecca. And of course, then I did leave Google that second time I worked at Google to go work on React, which was built at Facebook. So there's that.
Well, I mean, you're not going to get me to. I mean, Facebook is such a interesting melting pot of good and bad, and frankly, just reiteration of existing platforms. I mean, if you really think about it, Facebook is nothing but AOL or CompuServe. They already existed. They already did it. Just a little better marketing, a little bit easier to get into. They were free, or at least free monetarily. You're kind of selling yourself to be on there. But I will to give Facebook props. They have done something that nobody else has done, and that is increase the engagement of humanity between each other. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a positive thing. But as someone, myself, I'm a moderator on multiple groups, not just on Facebook, but like I mod the Postgres subreddit and the Schoolie subreddit and a couple of others. And the tools that they have built to manage that engagement far surpass any other platform I've seen or been a part of in my entire career. And I mean, I go all the way back to the BBS days and the Delphi and Prodigy and all of that. So I'll give Facebook props for that. What I won't give them props for is the blatant disregard for the mental health of young people. That's just, to me, is a line that is, I don't know why people aren't taking that more seriously. Let's talk about a cross section here. I mean, clearly through the conversation to date or to time, you've gone through a lot of different careers and paths and markets. I mean, I myself was a little bit more linear in the sense as once I got my teeth into tech, I followed tech all the way up through the dot-com boom and started my company. But you all my non-tech endeavors have either A, involved tech in some way, or B, were all just part-time passion projects. Like I owned half a publishing company for a while, for example. But it published technical books.
Yeah.
So, but you, I mean, you've been in journalism, you've been a cook. Do you still enjoy cooking? Is that like a passion that you never left you?
Yeah. I mean, the original motto for Chowhound was, live to eat. I mean, I am very much in that category. Like, I like to read about food, ingredients. I love ingredients. That's kind of the thing is I want to know about all of the kinds of ingredients, things I've never tasted before as a pretty exploratory point of view. Just an example, I remember being uh, I had kind of given up on Chinese food growing up in Texas, right? Like most of the Chinese food I had was what turns out to be Americanized Chinese food, but I didn't know that. And
Right.
then there was this guy I worked with who he didn't come eat lunch with the rest of us. He would just go eat wherever he went. I was like, where do you go? He's like, oh, I go to this grocery store. This is Chinese grocery store, and they make noodle soup. I'm like, well, I want to go with you. And I tasted something I'd never tasted before. Just a weird flavor that was just I was like, how have how am I 30 years old and I've never tasted this experience like this thing? And it's the Sichuan peppercorn, the huajiao, and
Mm-hmm.
like how had I never tasted it? Like I never. And I was like, oh, okay, I probably ought to learn more about this. Maybe I'm missing something. And then just like this whole world opens up in front of you that it turns out there's thousands of years of history and excellence in cuisine. And, then there's history around why you don't know about it. Kind of got shut
Mm-hmm.
down now. So, yeah, I passion for food is still a real thing for me.
It's funny you bring up Chinese food. I'm a big fan of Asian food, and I thought that I had found the places to eat were when I'm at the homestead. And then I was invited and appointed to have a position for the Chinese PostgreSQL community.
Oh,
Two
cool.
years in a row, they flew me out to Beijing.
Oh, yeah, then
And you have not had Chinese food unless you have had Chinese food in China.
Uh,
I will
absolutely.
never forget one of the nights they took us out, and they're big in the show, in the type, magicians and dancers and things like that. And then we went out to this restaurant. There's a magician and dancer and stuff, and they had this table that turned with all the food that you got. And I saw this thing of noodles, and I just dumped it on my plate. And then I dumped some sauce, which ended up being a peanut sauce. So it was just amazing. And I chowed it down, typical American style, right? Just and the guy sitting next to me goes, "You know what you're eating, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's noodles with peanut sauce." He's like, "Dude, that's cow intestine." It's like, well, it tasted good, so I want another service. I mean, what do you do? And it's funny because the gentleman across the table, he looks at me and goes, "Look, we have 1.5 billion people. If it's edible, we eat it,
Yeah.
right?"
Right.
And
If
it
it's
was
got legs,
delicious.
there's a phrase, I don't remember what it is, but it's like if it's got, any number of legs, you're gonna eat it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And actually, I'm going to ask you this, but I just, for the first time in my life, and I've been to France, and I would refuse to try it when I was in France. I had in Las Cruces escargot, Mexican escargot. It
Nice.
was amazing. What's a dish that you've had, like anytime in recent, that you hadn't had before, or that's just become your favorite?
Oh, well, kind of a favorite that I seek out, that's sort of unusual is this Thai soup called yen tafo. I had it in college at a Thai restaurant in Austin. I was like, oh my God, why do I like this? This is so weird. And it turns out it's made from this fermented morning glory paste, and it's a very particular smell, aroma, and it's just soup. It's like soup with fish stuff, and but it turns out all those little things add up to amazing. And its texture, its flavor, its salt, its sweet, and it's a hard ingredient to come by. So it's not a most Thai restaurants don't sell it. Most Thai restaurants, even in
Mm-hmm.
San Francisco, don't sell it. There are a few that make it, um, but that's one I seek out. That's kind of peculiar. Like I will or won't go to a Thai restaurant if they have it. I'm lured. I will go in and order it, almost for sure.
All right. So, well, let's get back into tech a little bit here. What is I mean, I see this immediately, but for our listeners, what is the relationship between, say, advertising and UX?
Yeah, it's a really interesting, challenging one because advertising is really just about trying to get information out there that you didn't necessarily ask for sometimes, right? It's how we in publishing or in applications sometimes or in services, that's how we make money is we sell space, we sell eyeballs. And UX is eyeballs, it's interactivity, it's the experience of you go to watch a movie, hey, we're going to show you another movie. Before you get your movie, not the movie you wanted to see, we're going to show you another movie. It's like, okay, you've really just like kind of interfered with my direct desire to accomplish a task. So advertising is a really tricky, interesting thing. And for example, the way it plays into Vercel is like I talk to a lot of agencies, and agencies will be commissioned to build a site for a customer, and they're like, okay, what do you care about? Well, it has to be really fast. So they build a really fast website on Next.js, and it's hosted on Vercel, and they're like, core web vitals are amazing. And then the company's like, great, okay, now you need to add the advertising so we actually can like fund this whole business that you've built for us in tech. And they're like, okay. And they start adding, they add a tag manager. And next thing you know, all the core web vitals just start to tank because it's a real-time bidding system that requires you preserve space, and people forget to preserve that space, and then you jump in an ad and then the page jumps down, and now you've really you've created this unpredictable user experience. So I think that's what it is. Advertising is it's the thing you can universally sell. And awareness, you're selling the eyeballs for the thing you've built. You go back to publishing, that's what it was. And so the advertising theory I learned even at the Chronicle was that you had to run 12 ads before anyone saw your ad. And for a new business owner, they're like, you're kidding me, this is a racket. But it's not. I mean, that's just the psychology of it. You really have to invest in it. If you're a restaurant, it's a weird multiplexed problem, right? Like you need people to come to your restaurant. You also need the food reviewers to come to your restaurant. Well, how do you think they find out about them? Well, you're not going to send them an email. They have a million emails, but actually they read the paper. So it turns out advertising is like this thing that works on, multiple dimensions / all of us. And, it is the thing in the user experience. So great advertisement delivers great user experience. In fact, you get something relevant. That's what Google capitalized on with Google Ads, right? Was, hey, you're actually getting something relevant that, doesn't have SEO yet, perhaps. And they're giving you ads that are at least spiritually aligned to the thing you're looking for.
You touched on two things there that I think are important. One is the iteration of advertising. A lot of people don't realize, actually I say three things, realize that you're not necessarily, people aren't going to pick up on the value of your proposition likely the first time. The first time it's like, it just, and the second time it kind of just goes a little slower. And then the third time you might start paying attention a little bit and it just builds.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. In one way, I think that's good because it prevents a lot of advertising from being effective because you have to think, you really got to think about what you're putting out there. But you're right with Google, and Facebook does this too. The ads that I get when I see them, because I use ad blockers and all that stuff, but when I see them, they're always relevant to me in some way, even if it's accidentally relevant, right? Where you get an ad and you're like, what the hell? Yeah, it's personalized, but you're like, why in the hell am I getting this ad? And then you remember that you read this article, over here, and it's related in some way.
Yep.
And I think there's value there because we're no longer just plastering, we're not putting models smoking cigarettes up on TV. right? Trying to get guys to smoke cigarettes. But on the other hand, it's also a little creepy at the way it
Sure.
tracks you, right? Um, but I also liked your point about, the interaction of being a good ad. And because advertising in a lot of ways for a lot of sites has become so obtrusive that the moment it happens, like if some little pop-up comes up, or if I'm trying to read an article and then the article goes away and
Yeah.
there's this ad, I just close the tab. I
Of
just close the
course.
tab. He's like, if you don't, right?
Yeah. No, no. I mean, it's an
Uh,
art. You go back to the history of advertising, and the best advertisement is creative art. It can be
mhm.
amazing and it can be terrible. That's just all there is to it. There's quality and there's not quality. And for again, there's inspiration to have quality. Like if you produce wonderful advertisements, like you're making people who end up getting them, you've challenged their bar. They're suddenly kind of delighted. The bar's so low that when you've done
Mhm.
something amazing, they're delighted, and it's the talk of the town. So it does get a lot of creative people into it, into advertising because of that, and that's true for user experience, right? Like you're trying to make this task of like reading email delightful, or at least fast, right? And if you can make it delightful, so much the better. So there's a pretty good, a lot of the same people are drawn to both industries, but you know, it can inspire creativity.
Years ago, there was a movie about advertising, and I don't remember what it was called. I mean, it was a long time ago. But something that stuck with me, actually, and there's two examples of advertising that have stuck with me my entire life. One was this movie, and what it was basically was an advertising exec that got tired of like the sliminess of it and went out on his own and started. He basically said, "What if we just told the truth?" And the truth in this scene was Volvos. They're boxy, but they're good. That I am 50 years old, and that has stuck with me in my entire life. The other, and I can't believe I'm going to bring this up, especially since I'm a guy. Uh, the other is OB, the tampon. To this day, I can sing the whole jingle. I'm not going to, because I'm not going to torture people. I'm a terrible singer. But I can. I can sing the whole jingle, and it'll just randomly pop in my head. I'll be taking a walk, listening to Chris Stapleton or U2 or Led Zeppelin, and then for some reason in my head comes the OB jingle right through my head. That is the type of advertising I think every company wishes they could do.
Sure. No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, and it feeds another thing which is interesting, like going back to the theory of like seeing something a bunch of times. I mean, I think it is that the OB commercial kind of similar. I mean, it's a really effective jingle, and you probably heard it a bunch of times. And there's a thing in the human brain that like likes rehearing something it's heard before. So again, you might hate, never gonna give you, but you hear it and you're like, it does give you, it gives you, you get some kind of endorphin hit because you know it. It's a known thing. It gives you a little laugh or something. And so like again, go back to the time when we were kids, and like, you had the radio and they would play the same song over and over. And at some point, you maybe didn't like it, but you knew it. And so as compared to something you've
Mm-hmm.
never heard before, where the bar is really high to get an opinion, something you'd already heard, well, you were naturally predisposed to at least appreciate your brain appreciated knowing something it already knew, and it could pattern match against it. And then of course we also as humans, we
I
like
want
that.
to.
We connect and we like new stuff. So
Well, I need to applaud you. We're going into our fourth season in January, and that is the first time we've been Rickrolled. Um,
okay.
but all right, so as we're getting close here, so uh, your career has clearly been nonlinear. You're going around here. What what advice would you give someone who my producer says taking the long road, and I don't know that that's fair. Um, but I
It's
do
fair.
think that as a society,
Well,
you
go
think
ahead.
that's
Go ahead.
fair?
I think it's fair. For me, I think it's fair.
Okay. Well, my point, that what I was actually going to say was, although I agree, taking the long road to where you want to be is fair in a lot of stories. But my concern is those of us who have kind of forgotten that to get what you want takes effort. There is no real shortcut.
Yeah.
What would your advice be for that, for anyone who is either afraid of taking the long road or doesn't see the value of the long road?
Well, I guess the thing I would talk about is it's like, is it long? It's just a road. It's just a road. Like I don't know why it's longer or shorter. The road for me is like is the growth and learning, you know, desire. And also, it kind of comes back to the pragmatism side of like I was driven by the GNU manifesto's dream of like saving people time, enabling people. That feels really good to me. There's different ways to do that and different kinds of jobs that can give you that experience and also whatever endorphins work for you. I mean, I studied a lot of philosophy in college and
Mm-hmm.
for me writing a computer program is like having the button pressable is my philosophy proof correct right now how about right now it's a very tight feedback loop, so I get that same thing from programming. But the road is as long as you get to live. It's just a road. So I think what you could I think when people would ask me that question, what they're doing is they're going, oh, okay, you started off as a as a webmaster, right? Then you were an individual contributor. Oh, then you got to work at Google. Then you became VP of something, something, something. Sounds really good. It looks like a line that goes like this. And, that's a nice backstory you can tell. And so then you can say, oh, that took you 20 years. Therefore, it's a long road. But I had no ambition to be a VP of software engineering at any point in time, particularly. I just kept doing stuff that I thought was meaningful. And, it that does translate here into okay, I'm really my job right now is an operator and an enabler for other people, and that is also generally considered a function of leadership, and that looks like a career trajectory up, but it's just another it's just another vector. I've learned to play with tools I didn't previously play with. Like I wrote a lot of code, and I know how to use that lever. And now I don't use that lever. I've tried to like say, okay, what if I don't use that lever? So in some ways, it's just a different road. It's neither long nor short. So I'm on a new road. I think the goal is like jump roads to the extent that they challenge you to try to succeed with different tools and see where you get joy, where you are effective, and where other people can appreciate you. And if you don't like it, like it's not a good idea. Like if you're like, oh, I have this ambition to achieve a title, yeah, you can probably do that. Most people I know that have that and then do it are unsatisfied because that isn't actually what they wanted to do. They get the title and they're like, okay, I got it. And now what? That doesn't mean anything. I go hang out down the street with some friends of mine. They could care less what my title, their job is. You know, they care about am I paying attention to them when I'm hanging out with them? Are we talking about something interesting? Do we have anything to do?
Yeah, I think title chasing is definitely something that, I mean, I did it for a while. I mean, for the beginning of my career because I didn't know any better, right? I just knew that, well, if I reach here, I make this much, which is
Yeah,
more than this much. So I want
yeah,
to
yeah,
reach
yeah.
here, right? Um, but I certainly don't do it. And in fact, for a long time, I went anti-title, and I would just randomly, because since I own my business, right, it's like, call me whatever you want. And I would
Right.
have all these weird titles. At one point, it was the purveyor of Postgres and just
Okay.
various things, trying to figure out an identity, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I've kind of settled back in. I mean, I have an official title, founder and CEO, and I just don't think it matters, right? It's what we do that matters. It's how we treat people that matters. It's how we enable people to lift themselves up, either through paying it forward or a hand up. Those are the things that matter. I mean, who cares if you're? I'll never forget. There was a nonprofit I was a part of for a short period of time, um, and there was a gentleman, I won't name his name, but on the board they were like, "You need to make this guy happy. This guy has stood on a stage with Elon Musk, And my response was, so what? How does that help our members? And they could not believe I said this. They were more involved with this guy and the fact that he'd met Elon Musk than the fact that that has nothing to do with how to service the members of the nonprofit. So that'd be my advice, is just don't worry about that. Just do good. Right?
I mean, early on, as you say, like early in your career, you kind of, it's sort of like, oh, here's the path. I know I remember getting my first promotion at Google, and I was so excited. And then it was like, I got $5,000 more. I was like, what? I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. And so, it's pretty easy to be like, okay, that is not the stepwise path to growth. Whereas like, again, one thing I did appreciate about Google was it was not meant to be hey, here's a new challenge. It was a recognition of what you were already doing. Mm-hmm. You were already performing at a different level, and it's just an acknowledgement of that. Which again implies that you shouldn't necessarily go chasing these things. You either are doing them or you're not. And they give you they give you guidance around how to have more impact. Like, I thought that was the best advice I've had, early, I say early, I'd already been in tech 10 years, but when I got to Google and learned about how a lot of things were centered on this scope of impact idea, I really latched onto that because it enabled me to discern which ideas I should put my energy into, because the company was encouraging me to pick the ones with the biggest scope of impact, which meant I had to step back and try to analyze these 5 things I really wanted to go build. Well, which one would have the most impact, assuming I could achieve all of them, which was not necessarily true. But then you're analyzing from a different point of view. And so if you get good at that, then you actually make better decisions for yourself. And they are irrespective. I mean, yes, they may mean you get a promotion in your current job, but it actually turns out it's just like good advice, generally speaking. If you can see an opportunity to have a larger scope of impact on the world, perhaps that's what you should be doing. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't go start things. You should only go work at a monster company with tons of users, because you can still have a lot of impact on a lot of ways in small companies and small businesses, and they grow.
I think a lot of people don't pay attention to the fact that, one, I love the term scope of impact, because you can take two, I'm oversimplifying here, but 2 approaches. Big scope of impact, Gmail, huge scope of impact. But that's the shotgun approach, right? But sometimes you need to be an artist in your impact, and you may not see the impact, but your grandchildren do when you're long gone, right? Because it's all connected. I mean, this idea that somehow we're not connected to the past, for example. I mean, things that happened 200 years ago to my great-great-great-grandfather guarantee you impact me to this day, even though I may not know what they are, right? Because just the way things come down generations. But with that, what do you think is next for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very focused on Vercel's growth right now. I think that it's kind of at this great nexus of opportunity to really grow and become, to make it so that I click links on my phone and I don't cringe, and that experience is good. And I think that's a combination of the software used to build those sites, as well as the thing that can serve them quickly. So it really is the epitome of everything I've worked on for a very long time in web performance, user experience, etc. So I'm pretty focused on that. And there's a lot of headroom. We're not a huge company. There's a lot of room there. So that's what's next for me. But I'm also other non-work related things. I'm trying to finish mixes on a record. I write music and I record music. So my goal is to get this done before Christmas. I'm saying it on the podcast so that I'll actually get it done. And that will come with a whole new set of things I need to do that are adjacent, that are like, oh, I need to make a website. Fun. I get to go test tech, but also I'm not a designer, so I need to go find people to work with. I have some ambitions where I need to put some energy into getting stuff done. So that's what's next for me.
Fantastic. Well, I really want to thank you for coming on. And this has been More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it, otherwise known as Conversations with the Most Important People You Haven't Met. Our guest today was Lindsey Simon. Hey, Lindsey, thanks a lot.